The autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets of downtown Seattle, creating a symphony of droplets that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Emma Martinez pulled her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she arranged the last display of vintage books in the front window of Chapters and Dreams, the small bookstore where she had worked for the past 3 years. At 24, Emma had built a simple life for herself, one carefully constructed around routines that kept her past buried deep where no one could find it. Her days followed the same peaceful pattern, opening the store at 8 in the morning, helping customers find their perfect reads, and closing at sunset with a cup of chamomile tea while she organized the day's receipts. The bookstore was her sanctuary, filled with the comforting smell of old paper and fresh coffee from the little cafe corner she had convinced her boss, Mrs. Chen, to add last spring. Emma's reflection in the rain-streaked window showed a young woman with gentle brown eyes and shoulder-length dark hair that she always kept in a simple ponytail. She preferred to blend into the background, to be invisible in a world where being noticed had once brought her nothing but pain. Her past was a locked chest she carried everywhere, and she had no intention of ever opening it again. That Thursday evening, as she was locking up the store, the rain began to pour harder. Emma realized she had forgotten her umbrella again, a habit that Mrs. Chen constantly teased her about. She stood under the small awning, watching the street flood with rushing water, when she heard the distinctive purr of an expensive car engine struggling in the storm. A sleek black Tesla had stopped, right in front of the bookstore, steam rising from its hood. Through the rain-blurred windshield, Emma could see a figure hunched over the steering wheel, clearly frustrated. Without thinking, she grabbed the shop's emergency umbrella and rushed out into the storm. Asher Blake had been having the worst day of his 29 years. His latest tech company acquisition had fallen through, his assistant had quit without notice, and now his car was overheating in the middle of a Seattle thunderstorm. As the founder and CEO of Blake Innovations, a company worth over $200 million, he was used to problems having solutions. But sitting in his expensive car, unable to move, he felt more helpless than he had since he was a teenager. A gentle tap on his window made him look up. Through the rain, he saw a young woman holding a large umbrella, her brown eyes filled with genuine concern. She was motioning for him to roll down his window, completely soaked despite her umbrella's protection. "Are you okay?" Emma called out, raising her voice above the storm. "Your car looks like it's in trouble." Asher rolled down his window, immediately feeling the cool rain on his face. "It overheated," he replied, having to shout over the thunder. "I think I'm stuck here until the storm passes." Without hesitation, Emma pointed toward the glowing windows of the bookstore behind her. "You can wait inside if you want. I work here, and there's coffee." Something about her offer struck Asher as remarkably kind. In his world of business deals and networking events, people rarely helped without expecting something in return. He studied her face, noting the way she seemed genuinely worried about a complete stranger's situation. "I don't want to impose," Asher said, but even as he spoke, he was already turning off the car's engine. "You're not imposing," Emma replied with a soft smile. "Besides, you'll catch pneumonia if you stay out here." Asher grabbed his jacket and followed Emma through the rain to the bookstore. As she unlocked the door, he noticed her hands were shaking slightly, though he couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. The moment they stepped inside, he was enveloped by warmth and the most comforting smell he had encountered in years. The bookstore was exactly what Asher had imagined a perfect bookstore should be. Tall shelves lined with books created cozy nooks throughout the space. Soft lighting cast everything in a golden glow, and classical music played quietly from hidden speakers. Emma moved around the space with practiced ease, turning on the coffee machine and grabbing towels from behind the counter. "Here," she said, handing him a towel. "You're soaked." As Asher dried his hair, he watched Emma move around her domain. She seemed completely at peace here, like someone who had found exactly where she belonged. It was a feeling he had been searching for his entire adult life. "I'm Asher," he said, extending his hand once they were both relatively dry. "Emma," she replied, her handshake firm despite her delicate appearance. "Do you take cream or sugar in your coffee?" They settled into the small seating area Emma had created near the store's front window, watching the storm rage outside while sipping hot coffee. Asher found himself genuinely curious about this quiet woman who had rescued him from the rain. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, noting the way Emma's eyes lit up when she talked about the books surrounding them. 3 years, Emma replied. "Mrs. Chen, the owner, took a chance on me when I really needed a fresh start." There was something in the way she said, "fresh start," that caught Asher's attention, but he didn't press. Instead, he found himself sharing things he rarely told anyone about his own life, how success had brought him everything except happiness, and how he often felt like he was living someone else's dream. "What made you start your company?" Emma asked, genuinely interested in his answer. "I wanted to create something that mattered," Asher said, staring into his coffee cup. "But somewhere along the way, it became more about the money and the recognition than the actual purpose." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we lose ourselves in what we think we're supposed to want instead of figuring out what we actually need." Her words hit Asher with unexpected force. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, and saw someone who seemed to understand the loneliness that success could bring. For the first time in years, he was sitting across from someone who wasn't trying to impress him or get something from him. They talked for 2 hours, long after the rain had stopped. Emma shared her love of literature, her dream of someday writing her own novel, and her contentment with her simple life. Asher found himself opening up about his childhood, his drive to prove himself, and the emptiness he felt despite all his achievements. When Asher finally checked his phone and realized how late it had become, he felt a strange reluctance to leave, this warm, book-filled sanctuary and the woman who had created it. "I should let you get home," he said, standing reluctantly. Emma walked him to the door, and as she unlocked it, Asher noticed her hands were shaking again. This time, he was certain it wasn't from the cold. "Emma," he said softly, "would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" Emma's expression immediately changed, a shadow crossing her features. "I don't really date," she said quickly, looking down at her hands. "Just dinner," Asher said gently. "As friends. You saved me from drowning in my own car, and I'd like to return the favor by buying you a meal." Emma hesitated, and Asher could see an internal battle playing out in her expressive eyes. Finally, she nodded. "There's a small Italian place 2 blocks from here, Giovanni's. 7 o'clock? "Perfect," Asher said, smiling. "And Emma, thank you for tonight. I haven't felt this normal in a long time." As Asher walked back to his car, which had miraculously started without issue, he couldn't shake the feeling that this accidental meeting had changed something fundamental in his carefully ordered world. Behind him, Emma stood in the doorway of the bookstore, watching him leave with a mixture of hope and terror in her heart. She had spent 3 years building walls around herself, creating a life where no one could hurt her again. But in the space of one rain-soaked evening, a stranger with kind eyes had reminded her what it felt like to connect with another human being. As she locked the door and turned off the lights, Emma realized she was looking forward to tomorrow night, even as a small voice in her head whispered warnings about the dangers of letting anyone get too close. The secret she carried weighed heavily on her heart. But for the first time in years, Emma wondered if maybe, just maybe, she might be strong enough to trust someone with the truth about who she really was. The next evening arrived with a gentle sunset that painted the Seattle sky in shades of coral and gold. Emma stood in front of her small apartment mirror, changing clothes for the 4th time in 30 minutes. Her reflection showed a woman caught between hope and fear, excitement and anxiety warring in her brown eyes. She had chosen a simple navy dress that brought out her eyes, paired with the only decent shoes she owned, hoping she looked appropriate for dinner with someone who probably ate at restaurants that cost more than her monthly rent. Giovanni's restaurant was exactly as Emma had described it, a cozy family-owned Italian place with checkered tablecloths and the warm smell of garlic and basil filling the air. When she arrived, Asher was already waiting at a corner table, and Emma was struck by how different he looked in casual clothes. Gone was any hint of the successful businessman. Instead, he looked like someone she might actually belong with. "You look beautiful," Asher said as he stood to pull out her chair, and Emma felt her cheeks flush at the genuine warmth in his voice. The evening unfolded like the pages of a favorite book, comfortable and engaging from the very beginning. Over plates of homemade pasta and glasses of wine, they discovered shared interests that surprised them both. Emma learned that Asher had studied literature in college before switching to computer science, and he was amazed to discover that she had taught herself basic coding in her spare time. "Why did you switch from literature?" Emma asked, twirling spaghetti around her fork with practiced elegance that made Asher wonder about her background. "Practical reasons, mostly," Asher replied honestly. "My father convinced me that writers starve and programmers eat well, but I've regretted it ever since." "It's never too late to go back to what you love," Emma said softly. "Maybe you could write in your spare time." Asher laughed, but not unkindly. "What spare time? I work 16-hour days, 6 days a week. Sundays I spend catching up on sleep and emails I missed." Emma studied his face, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes that success hadn't been able to erase. "That sounds lonely," she said simply. "It is," Asher admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "But loneliness feels safer than disappointment sometimes." Something in his words resonated deeply, with Emma touching the carefully guarded places in her heart where she kept her own fears. "I understand that," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's easier to be alone than to risk being hurt again." Their eyes met across the small table, and both felt the weight of unspoken understanding. They were two people who had built walls around their hearts for different reasons, sitting together in a tiny restaurant, recognizing something fragile and precious in each other. As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened into something neither of them had expected. Asher began stopping by the bookstore almost daily, sometimes to buy books he didn't need, other times just to sit in the comfortable chair Emma had placed near the poetry section and work on his laptop while she helped customers. Emma found herself looking forward to his visits, the way his presence made the familiar space feel more alive. They established routines that became precious to both of them. Tuesday evenings were for dinner at Giovanni's, where Maria, the owner's daughter, began setting aside their usual corner table without being asked. Thursday afternoons, Asher would bring coffee and pastries to the bookstore, and they would spend his lunch break discussing whatever book Emma was currently reading. Saturday mornings, they would walk through Pike Place Market, Asher marveling at Emma's ability to find the perfect gifts for people she barely knew, while Emma enjoyed watching this powerful businessman haggle with vendors over the price of flowers. But even as their connection grew stronger, Emma felt the weight of her secret becoming heavier. She noticed the way Asher's eyes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't looking, saw the tenderness in his expression when he brought her favorite tea without being asked, felt the electricity when their hands accidentally touched as they reached for the same book. She was falling in love with him, and she could see that he was falling in love with her, too. The thought terrified her. 1 month after their first dinner, Asher made a decision that would change everything. He had been researching ways to surprise Emma, wanting to show her how much their friendship meant to him when he decided to look into books about overcoming trauma. He had noticed the way Emma sometimes flinched at unexpected sounds, how she always chose seats with her back to the wall, and the sadness that occasionally flickered in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. His internet search led him down a path he hadn't expected. Emma Martinez wasn't just a bookstore clerk who loved literature and made amazing coffee. 3 years ago, she had been Emma Caldwell, daughter of Robert Caldwell, a wealthy businessman who had been convicted of embezzling millions from his clients' retirement funds. The scandal had been national news, and Emma's photo had been plastered across newspapers and websites as the disgraced financier's daughter who had disappeared after his trial. Asher sat in his downtown office, staring at the old news articles on his computer screen, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The Emma in those photos looked younger, more polished, wearing expensive clothes and attending charity galas. But the eyes were the same, those gentle brown eyes that had first drawn him in on that rainy night. He understood now why she had seemed so familiar, why her mannerisms sometimes suggested a background different from what she had shared. Emma hadn't just been seeking a fresh start when she came to Seattle. She had been running from a scandal that had destroyed her family and left her with nothing but shame and the need to disappear. The revelation left Asher with a choice. He could confront Emma with what he had learned, potentially destroying the trust they had built together. Or he could pretend he didn't know, living with the knowledge that their relationship was built on a foundation of hidden truth. That Saturday morning, when Emma arrived at their usual meeting spot at the market, she immediately noticed something different in Asher's demeanor. He was quieter than usual, distracted, and when she asked if something was wrong, he assured her everything was fine with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They were walking past a flower vendor when Emma stopped suddenly, her face pale as paper. Across the crowded market, a news crew was interviewing someone, and on their equipment, Emma could see the logo of the financial news network that had covered her father's trial extensively. "Emma?" Asher said softly, noticing her distress. "What's wrong?" She was shaking now, memories flooding back of microphones thrust in her face, reporters shouting questions about her father's crimes, the way friends had turned away when the scandal broke. The carefully constructed life she had built in Seattle suddenly felt as fragile as tissue paper. "I need to go," Emma whispered, backing away from the crowd. "Let me drive you home," Asher offered, reaching for her hand. "No," Emma said quickly, pulling away. "I just need to be alone." She turned and almost ran through the market, leaving Asher standing among the flowers and tourists, his heart breaking for the woman he loved and the pain she was carrying alone. That night, Emma sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone and debating whether to call Asher. She knew she owed him an explanation for her behavior, but the thought of seeing disappointment or disgust in his eyes when he learned the truth about her past was unbearable. At the same time, across the city, Asher was making a decision that would prove just how much Emma meant to him. Instead of waiting for her to come to him, he was going to show her that her past didn't define her worth, and that love meant accepting someone completely, secrets and all. The next morning, Asher arrived at the bookstore before opening time, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of gentle determination. Through the glass door, Emma saw him waiting, and her heart clenched with the knowledge that their peaceful bubble was about to burst. As she unlocked the door, Asher stepped inside and set the coffee on the counter. "We need to talk," he said softly. Emma's hands shook as she turned the sign from closed to open, knowing that this conversation would either strengthen their bond or destroy it entirely. The secret she had guarded so carefully was about to be exposed, and she had no idea if the man she had come to love would still want her in his life once he knew the truth about who she really was. "I know who you are, Emma," Asher said gently, "and I need you to know that it doesn't change how I feel about you." Emma's world tilted on its axis, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling as she realized that the moment she had been dreading and longing for had finally arrived. Emma's knees nearly buckled as Asher's words settled into the quiet bookstore around them. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed too bright, too revealing, as if it were exposing every carefully hidden corner of her past. She gripped the counter for support, her knuckles white against the dark wood. "You know?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the coffee machine. Asher took a step closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "I know that. 3 years ago you were Emma Caldwell. I know about your father's crimes, about the scandal, about how you lost everything and had to start over." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the familiar shame wash over her like a cold tide. This was the moment she had been running from, the inevitable destruction of the peace she had found in her small, hidden life. "And I know," Asher continued, his voice growing stronger, "that none of it was your fault, that you were as much a victim as anyone else who lost money because of your father's choices." Emma's eyes snapped open, surprise flickering across her features. In all the months since the scandal broke, no one had ever said those words to her. Not her former friends, not the media, not even her own mother, who had blamed Emma for not seeing the signs of her father's criminal behavior. "You don't understand," Emma said, backing away from him. "I should have known. I worked in his office during college summers. I should have seen what he was doing, should have stopped him somehow. People lost their retirement savings, their children's college funds because of my family." "Because of your father," Asher corrected firmly. "Emma, you were barely 21 when the investigation started. You were a college student who trusted her father, just like everyone else did." Emma shook her head, tears beginning to flow freely down her cheeks. "You don't know what it was like. The reporters following me everywhere, people recognizing me on the street and screaming about how my family stole their futures. I had to drop out of school, change my name, leave everything behind." Asher's heart ached as he watched the woman he loved relive her trauma. He had researched extensively after discovering her true identity, reading not just the news articles but the court transcripts, the victim impact statements, and most importantly, the testimony that proved Emma had no knowledge of her father's criminal activities. "The FBI cleared you of any wrongdoing," he said softly. "The investigation found no evidence that you knew anything about the embezzlement." "Legal innocence and social forgiveness are two very different things," Emma replied bitterly. "Do you know what it's like to have people look at you like you're personally responsible for ruining their lives? To have friends you've known since childhood refuse to speak to you because of something you didn't even know was happening?" Asher moved closer, slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I can't imagine how painful that must have been. But Emma, running away and hiding from who you are isn't the answer. You're not responsible for your father's crimes." I'm responsible for lying to you," Emma said, her voice breaking, "for letting you believe I was just some simple bookstore clerk with no past, no complications, for making you care about someone who doesn't really exist." "But you do exist," Asher said, reaching out to gently touch her face. "The Emma I've fallen in love with over these past months is real. Your kindness is real. Your intelligence, your passion for books, your way of making everyone around you feel heard and understood. That's all real." Emma stared at him through her tears, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Fallen in love with?" "Completely and irrevocably," Asher confirmed, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "And learning about your past doesn't change that. If anything, it makes me love you more." "How can you say that?" Emma whispered. "Because now I understand your strength," Asher replied. "You survived something that would have broken most people. You rebuilt your entire life from nothing. Created. This beautiful space helped countless customers find exactly the book they needed. You turned your pain into purpose, Emma. That's not something to be ashamed of." For the first time in 3 years, Emma allowed herself to consider the possibility that her past didn't have to define her future. Standing in the bookstore that had become her refuge, With the man she loved telling her that her scars didn't make her less worthy of happiness, she felt something shift deep in her chest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that people will find out who I am, that they'll come after you because you're associated with me. Your business, your reputation. I could ruin everything you've worked for." Asher pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she trembled against his chest. "Let them come," he said fiercely. "Let them try to hurt either of us. We'll face it together." "Together?" Emma looked up at him with hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "If you'll have me," Asher said, his own vulnerability showing in his voice. "Emma, these past months with you have been the happiest of my adult life. You've shown me what really matters, what a life built on genuine connection instead of just achievement looks like. I don't want to go back to the empty existence I had before I met you." Emma reached up to touch his face, studying the sincerity in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want to build a real life with you. Not hiding, not running, but standing together as partners. I want to help you write that novel you've always dreamed of. I want to expand the bookstore, maybe add author readings and writing workshops. I want to create something beautiful and meaningful together. And when people find out who I am, then we'll handle it," Asher said simply. "We'll be honest about what happened, show them the woman you've become, and trust that most people are capable of seeing past their prejudices to recognize genuine goodness when they encounter it." Emma was quiet for a long moment, letting his words sink into the wounded places of her heart, where she had carried shame and fear for so long. Slowly, she began to nod. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's try." The months that followed weren't always easy. When Asher publicly announced his relationship with Emma Caldwell, there was indeed media attention and public scrutiny. Some people criticized him for associating with the daughter of a convicted embezzler. A few potential business deals fell through because of the connection. But something remarkable happened as well. Other people began to see what Asher saw. A young woman who had survived devastating betrayal and built a life dedicated to serving others. Customers at the bookstore rallied around Emma, sharing stories of their own family scandals and second chances. Local media began featuring positive stories about the bookstore and its owner who had overcome adversity. Emma began writing her novel, a story about redemption and the courage required to build a new life from the ashes of the old. Asher scaled back his work hours and discovered that his company actually ran better when he wasn't micromanaging every detail. Together, they expanded the bookstore, adding a small event space where local authors could share their work. 1 year after that confrontation in the bookstore, Asher proposed to Emma in the exact spot where they had first talked about her past. He had arranged for the store to be filled with flowers and all their friends and chosen family. Mrs. Chen, Maria from Giovanni's, Emma's writing group, and Asher's sister who had flown in from Los Angeles. "Emma Caldwell Martinez," he said, kneeling beside the poetry section where they had spent so many quiet afternoons together. "You taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections complement your own, someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself." Emma's tears were happy ones this time, as she said yes, surrounded by the books and people who had helped them both heal and grow. Their wedding 6 months later was a celebration of second chances and the power of choosing love over fear. Emma walked down the aisle of the small church in a simple white dress, carrying wildflowers and wearing her grandmother's pearl necklace, one of the few things she had managed to keep from her old life. In her vows, Emma said, "You loved me before you knew my secrets, and you loved me even more after you learned them. You showed me that our past doesn't determine our worth, and our mistakes don't disqualify us from happiness." Asher's vows were equally moving. "You taught me that success isn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the love we give and receive, the lives we touch, and the courage we show in being authentically ourselves. As they danced their first dance, as husband and wife, surrounded by fairy lights and the warmth of people who had chosen to see their love story as one of hope rather than scandal, Emma realized that her greatest fear had become her greatest blessing. The secret that she thought would destroy any chance of happiness had instead become the foundation for the most honest, supportive relationship she could have imagined. 5 years later, Emma published her novel to critical acclaim and commercial success. The story of a woman rebuilding her life after family trauma resonated with readers around the world, and Emma began traveling to speak at events about resilience and recovery. Asher had indeed returned to writing, publishing essays about business ethics and the importance of second chances that influenced corporate policy across their industry. Together, they had turned their bookstore into a community hub that supported local authors and provided resources for people starting over after life-altering setbacks. Their love story became local legend, not because it was perfect, but because it proved that two broken people could create something beautiful together when they chose honesty over hiding, courage over fear, and love over the safety of solitude. On quiet Sunday mornings, they could still be found in the bookstore, Emma reading in the corner chair while Asher worked on his latest writing project. The space that had once been her hiding place had become their launching pad for a life neither of them could have imagined when they first met on that rainy Seattle evening. The secret that Emma had confessed with such fear had indeed changed their lives, but not in the way she had expected. Instead of destroying her chance at happiness, it had become the key that unlocked a love deeper and more genuine than either of them had dared to dream possible. And in the end, that made all the fear and pain worthwhile.